Greetings, my name is Louise Dente, and I welcome you to yet another edition of Cultural Caravan. On this edition, we celebrate the life and legacy of a great jazz musician, composer, arranger, Randy Weston. Randy's career spans over 6 decades and over 5 continents. We talk about his life and his influences on jazz music today. Are you ready to go? Well, I am. Let's go. We're now joined by Randy Weston. Randy Weston is a world-renowned pianist, composer, and a jazz historian. Welcome to Cultural Caravan.
Thank you very much.
You know, Randy, we are very excited because you have a lifetime of really celebrating our culture, Africa, America, and the Caribbean through your music. And, you know, I recall a quote by the late, great poet laureate, Langston Hughes, and he said of you, he says, when Randy Weston plays, a combination of strength and gentleness, virility and velvet emerges from the keys in an ebb and flow of sound, seemingly as natural as the waves of the sea. That is something.
That's deep.
That's deep. And you know, I admire Langston Hughes, and I know that you knew him.
Oh,
and,
I loved him.
And so we're going to talk about that. But let's first talk to the audience about you. Let's basically, your story started over 85 years ago in Brooklyn, New York. Tell the audience about your early years here in Brooklyn.
Well, my folks were living on Albany Avenue, between Bergen and St. Mark's Avenue, when I was born, you know. And I grew up with an incredible, energetic, Panamanian Jamaican father, a very strong spiritual Virginia mother, and all the families combined, you know. And I grew up in a very rich neighborhood because that was during the time what they call segregation. But we had our culture everywhere, you know. As a teenager, we had blues bands on the corner in Brooklyn, big band rehearsals, 11 o'clock in the morning in Brooklyn, the Black Church, the Calypso, because there were African people from many parts of the planet, were right there in Brooklyn. And we loved each other, we played with each other, we fought with each other, but that was my foundation. And also, I can't emphasize the importance of our parents. They were the ones who were multicultural in music. So they might bring in a Duke Ellington, they might bring in a Mahalia Jackson, they might bring in an opera, they might bring in a calypso. So we grew up. When I say we, myself and the young men in the neighborhood, young women in the neighborhood, we were truly multicultural with music and pride.
And you know, that experience seems to embody you as a person, a musician, and as a human being, those collective experiences. Now, you also, in your book, which is a new book that you've produced called The Autobiography of Randy Weston, African Rhythms. What inspired you to decide, to, in collaboration with Willard Jenkins, to, as is written here, you composed the work, composed by Randy Weston, arranged by Willard Jenkins. Tell us about that.
Well, this particular book happened because Willard Jenkins, who I met at Montreal Jazz Festival, and they had given me 5 nights of my music. One night, myself and David Murray, we did duo. One night with the Ganawa black people from Morocco. Another night, all blues. Another night, all Africa. And Melba Liston did the arrangements. So I was coming, I was at the rehearsal. Willard Jenkins, who I did not know, who was a journalist and a writer, he came to me and said how much he enjoyed my music, you know. So I told him and his wife, I said, don't leave yet, because tonight we're going to do Africa. Because he had heard the blues section, and he heard myself with David Murray and whatnot. So finally after that, he came to me and he said, listen, I'd like to write your autobiography, see. But it happened even before that. I was documenting my life in Morocco. I realized the importance of I've been so blessed to spend so many years on the continent, to grow up with people like Max Roach in Brooklyn, Ray Abrams and Pete Brown, all these great people, my father, my mother, my sister, the whole neighborhood. So I was truly blessed, and I realized that our story is not being told in the media. Yeah? And my father always encouraged me to read. So in the books, he would have books by J.A. Rogers. Everything would deal with African culture and black culture. He had maps on the wall of African civilization, African queens. So my father, loved Marcus Garvey, but he was an individual. But he always emphasized that we have to know about Africa when Africa was great, because all they're going to give you in the educational system is after colonialism and after slavery. In other words, like the North civilized Africa, Africa civilized the world, see. So I had that kind of foundation. And from that, music I wrote about Africa, and also my dad said something very important. He said, try to be around the best minds that you can find. So because of music, I met Sheikh Anta Diop in Dakar, Senegal. I played for John Henry Clark and Dr. Ben, Wayne Chandler, Ancient Future, Duke Ellington, Muhammad Ali. And in the book, I just emphasize the spirituality of our ancestors, how they kept us spiritually healthy during a period when we were going through a lot of pain. It was not good to have a black skin. It was not good to have nappy hair. It was not good to have big feet. Every kind of image was dehumanizing for us in the schools, in Hollywood. But when I was home, you know, I went to the black church. My mother would take me. It was another story. It was our power and our strength. So the book is simply this, that music is the voice of the Creator. Music has taken me all over the planet. Music is the very first language on the planet Earth. So I can play a Shinto shrine in Japan and bring Africa. I can play with a symphony orchestra in Boston. I can play with Ganawa people in Morocco. I can play in France with a sextet or piano solo. But music is the language of the universe, and African music is as old as Africa itself.
Let's talk about the fact that, as we know in this society currently, you know, there are young people who are watching this broadcast and you know, and probably not as familiar with jazz. You identify yourself as an historian of music. Why is it important that we keep that history connected to the music?
Well, you see, during the time of slavery and oppression, they would mix up different African people from different parts of Africa, so they could not communicate with the spoken language. But African people have another language, which is music. It's always been our first language, you see. And so therefore we are able to communicate through music and through sounds and through certain signals, you see. So to understand how great a Louis Armstrong was, how great a Buddy Bolin was, how great our ancestors who were brought here with absolutely nothing, how they took European instruments, how they took European languages and completely put the African rhythm and spirituality in it. So if you want to learn a language, you should always go back to the first letter, which is A. So I always advise young people, go back as far as you can. Study the great African civilizations of Egypt, of Ethiopia, of Mali, of Songhai, of Ghana. Study these civilizations, but study how they function. And compare that to how our parents took care of us, how they functioned, how they kept us out of the street, how we had to take art. You got to play piano or violin or dance. You got to do that. How the way our parents cooked the food with the African tradition, how they introduced so many incredible things in this country. And this music they call jazz, which I learned from Max Roach. It's African American classical music. That's the correct title of this music. And this music is the most advanced music of the whole 20th century. You see? So when you go back and you realize that we're all standing on the shoulders of our ancestors. So what Randy Weston is doing is because of Duke Ellington and Fats Waller going all the way back to ancient African civilization. But my father told me we got to go back to the place of origin. I've been to 18 countries in Africa. Every country that I've been to, I look for the oldest people I can find. I look for the oldest music I can listen to. See? And when you're with traditional people, they teach you to be very humble. Because we in the West, we're stars, you know. This one of the stars. Over there, no. They say God is a star. See? And they teach you certain spiritual principles about music. So when you have that background, when you're a young person, whether you're 9 years old or 17 years old or 25 years old, it gives you a feeling of pride and strength. You know what your ancestors created out of nothing.
Exactly.
I can remember people coming to my father's house with a knife and fork and make music.
Wow.
Make music out of a bottle, out of a pan. Because music came from Africa in the first place.
Exactly. And, you know, let's talk about the piano. How did you connect to that instrument specifically?
My father made me. He made me take piano lessons. I love the music, but I didn't want to practice, you know. And I was so tall for my age, and I wanted to play ball. My father, he was hard. He was hard. God bless him. He was hard, you know. But his response, he made me make sure I practiced the piano and studied music. And then by loving music so much, I was a big fan of music, you know. And loving music, then I tried to understand a little better what did Duke Ellington meant when him and Juan Tizol wrote Caravan. What was the meaning of Caravan? What was the meaning of Black, Brown, and Beige? And you start looking at these titles that Louis Armstrong, all their songs were geared to the African American community. So we survived because of the Louis Jordans and Bill Greens and Billie Holiday. That's how we survived, because at a time when we were down, this music bring you right back up.
Now, let's talk about, you talked about certain giants that you worked with in addition back, like we talked about Duke Ellington. Talk about that relationship. A lot of people don't know Duke, or we're not as close to understanding him as a musician. What was that relationship?
Well, you know, for somebody like Duke Ellington, for me, it's Creator sending us someone down to the planet to bring us spiritual strength, to bring us pride, to bring us dignity. That's how I look at Duke Ellington. That's how I look at Louis Armstrong. These are not jazz musicians. These are people who come from the ancient ancestors of Africa, and they've come at a certain time to uplift us. Before Duke Ellington was James Reese Europe. James Reese Europe was the first to take African American music and bring it up to class. And Duke came after him. Duke Ellington, pianist, incredible. I got some 1928 Duke Ellington playing stride piano. One of the first songs he wrote was called Soda Fountain Rag. Just scared to death with that left hand going like this. Composer, without doubt, America's greatest composer is Duke Ellington, for me. 3, band leader. He was a master of holding an orchestra. He kept an orchestra together almost 45 years. I knew him well, and I knew him to the point that I knew that he would take the royalties for his compositions to keep the big band going. You see, imagine that. You know. In addition to that, every member of that band was a master musician. Every one of them. So he handpicked everybody.
Wow.
You see. And then when Billy Strayhorn came with Duke Ellington, then you have a credible combination of musical giants. Also, Duke Ellington, he loved Africa. So he was writing things about Africa way in the early days. He wrote music about black people, Black and Tan Fantasy, The Mooch, Take the A Train, black people going from Brooklyn to Harlem and back, you know. Billy Strayhorn, Juan Tizol would come. And the members of the band all contributed. They took Bubba Miley, for example, he would take a trombone and take a bottle and get different sounds on a trombone. You know, African people, we like sound, right?
Exactly.
And Duke was a philosopher. He was a painter. He was, to me, in the true African tradition of a high master.
Tell us about that connection when you went to Africa again, bringing our experience to the Africa. What was the response of those that you came in contact with?
The very first trip or after?
So as it moved on, from the first trip onward.
On down.
Yes.
Well, 61 was, we spent 10 days in Lagos. And the whole idea was to see what was the connection spiritually, artistically, culturally between West Africa, in particular Nigeria, and African Americans, right? So they would have discussions during the day, everything from sculpture to painting. They had wonderful professors at the various universities. They would discuss Langston Hughes, they would discuss different people like that. Then at night, for example, they would have concerts. So I took with me Scobie Stroman from Brooklyn, a drummer and dancer, and the great Booker Irvin, tenor saxophone. So we played with Lyle Hampton's band, because Hamp, he brought 8 members of his band, so we played with Hamp's band for the first time. In addition, for example, they would have the 2 jazz dancers of the Savoy Ballroom, Al Mims and Leon James. Now the Savoy Ballroom, which was the mecca in Harlem of the music and dance, they were so gifted, those dancers. Every time Count Basie or Duke Ellington or Chick Webb would come in with some new music, they'd have the best dancers to create a new dance for the music. Okay, so going back to Lagos, Nigeria, so the two jazz dancers, they'd be on this side of the stage, have some traditional African dancers on this side of the stage, and they would compare with each other. Then all the Tunzi we played together, et cetera, et cetera. Then at night, I felt at home in Africa. I have to point that out. Once I arrived in Nigeria, I felt perfectly at home. I felt I had never left. So what I would do at night, I'd go hang out in a club called the Cabin Bamboo. Cabin Bamboo was run by a man named Bobby Benson. Bobby was Nigerian. He was a drummer, incredible guitar player, incredible. And he also did some USO tours, you know. It was his club. So his club was like a meeting place. So at his club, I discovered and knew Fela and a lot of the West African musicians, you know. I'd go there every night. And what he would do, they would play high life during the week at a big circle, like you do in the African nightclubs. You could see the sky. And on weekends, they would bring their traditional music, okay? So that was powerful because during that time, I heard my first experience live of African traditional music. And I had recordings, but never live. Live in a sense, when the Ballet Guinea would come to New York, I would be there. But I mean on the continent, you know. So on the weekends, I would have that experience. And then 1967, I was chosen to do a State Department tour. So I put together a group of Ray Copeland on trumpet, who had been my arranger, trumpeter, Clifford Jordan on tenor saxophone, Chief Bay on African drums, Ed Blackwell on drums, and Bill Weir on bass. And I brought my son with me as a dean, Niles Weston. And we traveled 3 months in Africa, and we performed in 14 countries, also in Beirut and Lebanon, in addition. And I had written music about Africa, but it was more, again, the history of jazz. Like starting off with West Africa, So the whole purpose to show the people, you may not recognize it, but this is your music. After it left Africa, it came in contact with European culture and other culture, and we're bringing it back to you. But this is your music, you know. So we did West Africa, we did Egypt, we did, first concert was Senegal. First country was Senegal, first concert was Dakar. So we had a big success, musically and culturally, because Chief Bey, he supplied the African traditional drum. So even if the people didn't necessarily understand what the trumpet player was doing, or the saxophone player, they could identify with the drum. Ed Blackwell being from New Orleans, he had that New Orleans beat, which is dance to their rhythms, you know. So we had a big success.
What would you say to those out there who are looking at music, again, looking at hip hop, and I first certainly would love to get your thoughts on the new forms of music that have been out there in terms of what can we do to, in this case, further help our people, our young, understand the importance of musicianship. And I'm talking about actually learning how to play an instrument, not necessarily pressing buttons on a keyboard, you know, on a machine. What messages do you have for them, and what's your opinion of the current music that is offered today, and what we can do to continue in the legacy of preserving this art form for the future?
Well, it's not the young people. We don't have the cultural leadership of the adults. This is the problem. Young people are open, see? Plus, there's nothing on the media. I've never seen the media as bad as it is today. Nothing there on our music and our culture. The ancient Egyptians created some of the finest schools of music since the beginning of our planet. They created all the instruments, but all the instruments were works of art. They created harps, 7 foot tall. Everything was art. Drums, everything. But what was the purpose of music? Music was a healing force. Music was to keep the people together. Now the music that we call jazz, there's no such thing as an age group. You create music for all the ages. You create a music that 90-year-old grandma would enjoy, or a 4 or 5-year-old child can enjoy.
Exactly.
We didn't have music for a particular age group. That's number one. The most important thing by studying the foundation, which is African music. In traditional African society, for example, to be a master, you can't just play good. No. In the West, you can be a bum and be a brilliant artist. Not in traditional society. No, no. You have to be clean of mind. You have to be clean of spirit. You have to tell the story of your people. Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, they were storytellers. All those songs told the story of us, okay? We would never survive without this music. We would never survive because they produce music that make us laugh. They produce music that make us cry. They put music that make us play. They created all kinds of music that comes out of African traditional society. So when you understand the beginnings of music, which is not Europe, which is Africa, where music started, healing, family, respect, elders, history, studying what happened before. I spent my life reading about 5,000, 10,000 years ago because they knew that music came from the universe. Each planet has got its own sound. Each planet has got its own rhythm. The Creator gave us music on the planet Earth so we could communicate, and we could use it for many things. Music can make you sleep. Monk could go to the piano and play something and make you laugh. Duke Ellington could do black, brown, and beige, and you realize African people were many colors. Go back and understand the meaning of the music. Go back as far as you can. The oldest records you can find, King Oliver, Louis Armstrong, go way back, study the lyrics of the song, and realize that this was our traditional music. What we call blues, what we call jazz, what we call it. This is the traditional music that our ancestors created so we could survive and remain spiritual. And that's the best thing, and I tell that to the elders more than the young people. Because you see, when we grew up, we had Paul Robeson, we had Muhammad Ali, we had Sugar Ray Robinson, Joe Louis. all of them were into the music.
Mm-hmm.
They'd come to the clubs. They all knew the music.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's changed. We got to bring that back.
Exactly.
And our responsibility, we the artists, we've got to get back into the African American community. We've been cut off. See, we only play downtown. We only play at festivals. It's not enough. Traditional people say, no, no, no. You got to play for your people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well
So
said.
we're working on ways now to bring the music back to our people.
Exactly.
Let them know this is your music. We are a beautiful people. I don't accept anything less than that, you know. So everything I do is to show the beauty of our people. Because I've been all around, but I love my folks, you know. And we've been through many difficult times. And the young people, they don't have the exposure like we had. And so that's one of the problems. That's why I said we have to get back into the community. And thank you very much for inviting me.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much, sir. Wow, I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast, and we continue to encourage you to tune in and to tell a friend. And you can reach us online at www.ccptv.org. But until next time, Louise Dente saying thank you.